Jeremiah Flint dropped the telegram like it was on fire, his weathered hands trembling as he watched the stagecoach disappear in a cloud of dust. The woman standing before his ranch house wasn't the golden-haired Swedish bride he'd been expecting. Instead, a petite Chinese woman in silk robes clutched a carpetbag, her dark eyes wide with what looked like terror. "Where's my bride?" Jeremiah bellowed at the departing coach, but the driver was already too far gone to hear. He turned back. To the woman, who had taken several steps backward, speaking rapidly in a language that sounded like music and waterfalls. Her voice rose in pitch, clearly distressed. Jeremiah ran his fingers through his unkempt brown hair, cursing under his breath. After 3 years of correspondence with Miss Astrid Lindquist, he'd finally saved enough money to bring her to his remote Wyoming ranch. He'd built an addition to his cabin, bought new clothes, even attempted to tame his wild beard. Now this. The woman pointed at herself, then at him, then at the house, speaking in rapid Chinese. She pulled out a crumpled piece of paper and thrust it toward him. Jeremiah recognized his own handwriting on the envelope, but the letter inside was covered in Chinese characters he couldn't decipher. "I don't understand," he said slowly, shaking his head. The woman's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. She sank to her knees in the dirt, still clutching the letter, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Jeremiah felt like a monster. Whatever mix-up had occurred, this woman was clearly as shocked as he was. She was stranded on his ranch, hundreds of miles from the nearest town, with no way to communicate and nowhere to go. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and he noticed the woman's face was flushed from heat and exhaustion. Whatever else was happening, he couldn't leave her sitting in the dirt crying. "Ma'am," he said gently, extending his hand. She looked up at him with such fear that he nearly stepped back. Her face was delicate, like porcelain, with high cheekbones, and eyes that reminded him of dark honey. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest tight, but she was clearly terrified of him. "Water," he said, miming drinking. "You need water." He pointed to the house, then to himself, trying to convey that he meant no harm. After a long moment, she took his offered hand and allowed him to help her stand. Inside the cabin, Jeremiah poured cool water from his pitcher into a tin cup. The woman accepted it gratefully, drinking deeply. She looked around the sparse interior's bed in the corner, the rough-hewn table, the stone fireplace, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She spoke again in Chinese, her voice broken and pleading. Though he couldn't understand the words, her tone was unmistakable. She was lost, frightened, and completely dependent on his mercy. Jeremiah sank into his chair, head in his hands. How in blazes was he going to figure this out? 3 days passed in awkward coexistence. The woman who had managed to convey through gestures that her name sounded like Maylin had taken up residence in the small addition Jeremiah had built for his Swedish bride. She kept the space immaculately clean and seemed to spend most of her time sitting by the window, staring out at the endless prairie with tears in her eyes. Jeremiah tried to maintain his normal routine, but found himself constantly aware of her presence. She moved like a ghost through his life, appearing silently to set wildflowers on his table, or to sweep his porch when she thought he wasn't looking. She never ate unless he specifically brought her food, and even then she ate sparingly, as if afraid to be a burden. On the 4th morning, Jeremiah woke to the smell of something extraordinary. He stumbled out of bed to find Maylin in his kitchen, stirring something in his largest pot. She had somehow transformed his meager supplies of rice, vegetables, and a chicken into a fragrant soup that made his mouth water. She gestured for him to sit, then served him a bowl with such graceful movements that he felt like he was in some fancy restaurant instead of his rough cabin. The soup was unlike anything he'd ever tasted, complex and warming, with flavors he couldn't identify. "This is incredible," he said, and though she couldn't understand his words, his expression must have conveyed his meaning because she smiled for the first time since arriving. It transformed her entire face, making her eyes sparkle with life. From that moment, something shifted between them. Malin began cooking all their meals, somehow making his simple supplies stretch into elaborate dishes. Jeremiah found himself looking forward to mealtime, not just for the food, but for the quiet companionship. They developed a system of gestures and expressions that allowed them to communicate basic needs and ideas. She showed him how she preferred to wash clothes, using less water but getting them cleaner than he ever had. In return, he taught her to milk his cow, laughing when she initially ran away from the large animal in terror. By the end of the week, C was collecting eggs from his chickens and had somehow coaxed his ornery rooster into docility. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Malin began speaking softly in Chinese. Her voice was melodic, rising and falling like a lullaby. Though Jeremiah couldn't understand a word, he found himself mesmerized by the sound. When she finished, she looked at him with such sadness that his heart ached. "I wish I could understand," he said quietly. She seemed to sense his meaning and placed her small hand over his large, calloused one. The touch sent electricity through his entire body. That night, Jeremiah lay awake, thinking about the woman in the next room. She wasn't the bride he'd ordered, but she was changing his life in ways he hadn't expected. His cabin had never been cleaner or more comfortable. His meals had never been more delicious, and he'd never felt less alone. But he could see the homesickness in her eyes. The way she sometimes stood at the edge of his property, looking east toward the mountains, as if she could see all the way back to China. Whatever circumstances had brought her to his doorstep, she was here against her will. The question was, what was he going to do about it? 2 weeks into their strange arrangement, disaster struck. Jeremiah was mending fence in the far pasture when he heard Malin screaming, dropped his tools and ran toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found her cornered against the chicken coop by a massive rattlesnake, its tail buzzing ominously as it prepared to strike. Without thinking, Jeremiah dove between them, grabbing the snake behind its head and flinging it away from Malin. The serpent landed with a thud and slithered off into the tall grass, but not before Jeremiah felt the burning pain in his forearm, where its fangs had found their mark. Malin rushed to his side, her face white with terror as she saw the twin puncture, wounds already beginning to swell. She helped him back to the cabin, speaking rapidly in Chinese, her voice high with panic. Jeremiah felt the venom spreading through his system, his vision beginning to blur at the edges. "Snake kit?" he managed to gasp, pointing toward a wooden box on his shelf. "Knife, tourniquet, . But his words were slurring together, and darkness was creeping in from all sides. Malin seemed to understand. She retrieved the snakebite kit with shaking hands, but when she opened it, her face filled with confusion. The instructions were in English, and the crude drawings weren't clear enough to follow safely. Instead, she did something that shocked Jeremiah back to consciousness. She leaned down and put her mouth directly over the wound, sucking out the venom and spitting it aside. Again and again she repeated the process, tears streaming down her face as she worked to save his life. "No," Jeremiah protested weakly. "Dangerous ... for you ... But she ignored him completely, continuing her desperate efforts. She tore strips from her silk dress to bind his arm, then mixed something from her carpet bag with water and forced him to drink it. The liquid was bitter beyond description, but almost immediately he felt some of the fog lifting from his mind. For the next 3 days, Malin never left his side. She bathed his fevered brow with cool cloths, forced more of her mysterious medicine down his throat, and held his hand through the worst of the delirium. When he finally woke with a clear head, he found her asleep in a chair beside his bed. Her hands still clasped in his. The sight of her filled him with emotions he couldn't name. This woman who owed him nothing, who had been thrust into his life, against her will, had risked her own life to save his. She had stayed by his side when she could easily have taken his horse and ridden away. "Mei-lin," he whispered, and her eyes flew open immediately. When she saw that he was lucid, she broke into fresh sobs, touching his face gently as if to assure herself that he was really recovering. "Thank you," he said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her palm softly. She blushed deeply, but didn't pull away. From that day forward, everything changed between them. The formal distance disappeared, replaced by a tenderness that needed no words. Mei-lin would brush his hair back from his forehead when she thought he wasn't looking. Jeremiah found himself standing closer to her when they worked together, there. Bodies unconsciously seeking each other's proximity. They began teaching each other their languages. Mei-lin would point to objects and say the Chinese word, then listen carefully as Jeremiah pronounced the English. She was a quick learner, soon, managing simple phrases like good morning and thank you. Jeremiah's attempts at Chinese were less successful, but One evening, as they sat by the fire, Mei-lin spoke her first complete English sentence. "You, good man, Jeremiah." Her accent made his name sound like music, and the trust in her eyes nearly undid him completely. The truth came out on a rain-soaked October morning when a Chinese merchant arrived at the ranch, his wagon loaded with goods bound for the railroad. Mei-lin ran to him, speaking rapidly in her native tongue. And Jeremiah watched as the merchant's expression shifted from confusion to shock to anger. "This woman says she is Mei-lin Zhou," the merchant translated, his English heavily accented but understandable. "She was sold to pay her father's gambling debts. The letter you received it was forgery. Men in San Francisco, they steal your money and send her instead of Swedish woman you expected." Jeremiah felt his blood run cold. Sold? Like a slave? The merchant nodded grimly. Her family owed money to bad men. They take her, bring her here, tell her she must work to pay debt. But now she says... He spoke to Mei-lin again, and she responded at length, occasionally glancing at Jeremiah with an expression he couldn't read. "Now she says she'll no want to leave," the merchant finished, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "She says this is home now." His heart hammered against his ribs. "Ask her, ask her if she wants to go back to China. I have money saved. I could pay for passage." The merchant translated, and Mei-lin's response was swift and vehement. She shook her head repeatedly, then spoke directly to Jeremiah in her broken English. "No go China. No family there now. Home is here. With you." The merchant looked between them shrewdly. "Ah, I see. You have found something neither expected." He smiled knowingly. "But there is problem. The men who brought her, they evil. They will come looking for her when they discover she'll not send money back to them." A chill ran down Jeremiah's spine. What kind of men? "The kind who hurt women, who do not obey," the merchant replied grimly. "They have business... bringing Chinese girls to America. Not good business. They will not let her go easy." Lane seemed to understand the gist of the conversation because she moved closer to Jeremiah, her face pale with fear. He put his arm around her protectively, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. "How long before they come?" Jeremiah asked. The merchant shrugged. "Maybe 1 month, maybe 2. Depends on how much money they expect from her, but they will come." That evening, after the merchant had gone, Jeremiah and Mei-lin sat before the fire in tense silence. Finally, she spoke in her careful English. "I bring danger to you. Maybe I should go." "No." The word came out sharper than he'd intended. "You're not going anywhere." She looked at him with wide eyes. "But bad men come. They hurt you." Jeremiah took her hands in his, marveling at how small and delicate they were. "Malin, I've lived alone on this ranch for 8 years. I've fought off rustlers, survived blizzards, and killed more rattlesnakes than I can count. A few city thugs don't scare me. But why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why you protect me? I'm not your real bride." Jeremiah studied her face in the firelight, the elegant curve of her cheek, the intelligent spark in her dark eyes, the strength that had carried her through unimaginable hardships. How could he explain that somewhere in the past month she had become more precious to him than his own life? "Because," he said finally, "real or not, you're the only woman I've ever loved." The words hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Malin's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time since he'd known her. They weren't tears of sorrow. Malin's response came not in words, but in actions that spoke louder than any declaration. She cupped Jeremiah's weathered face in her small hands and kissed him with a sweetness that made his knees weak. When they broke apart, she whispered in English that was growing stronger every day, "I love you too, with all heart." The next few weeks passed in a haze of newfound intimacy and growing anxiety. Their love bloomed like wildflowers in spring, natural, beautiful, and impossible to contain. Malin moved her belongings from the addition into Jeremiah's room, and they fell into the rhythms of married life as if they'd been together for years. She taught him to appreciate the subtle flavors of tea, while he showed her how to read the weather in the clouds and stars. They worked together seamlessly, her gentle efficiency complementing his steady strength. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Malin mending clothes while Jeremiah read aloud from his few books, helping her learn English. Through stories of adventure and romance, but beneath their happiness lurked the constant fear of what was coming. Jeremiah began carrying his rifle everywhere and taught Malin to load and fire his pistol. She proved to be a surprisingly good shot, her small size allowing her to brace the weapon steadily. "In China, my uncle teach me bow and arrow," she explained when Jeremiah expressed surprise at her accuracy. "He say woman must protect herself when men cannot." The danger seemed distant until the morning Jeremiah found hoofprints near his property line to many horses, moving too purposefully to be casual travelers. That evening, he saddled his best horse and rode to the neighboring ranch 20 miles away. "Ezra," he said to the grizzled rancher who answered his knock, "I need a favor, a big one." Ezra Cromwell had been Jeremiah's neighbor for 5 years, and though they rarely socialized, they had helped each other through various crises. He listened without interruption as Jeremiah explained the situation, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. "So you're telling me some Chinese slave traders are coming to collect your woman?" Ezra summarized. "She's not property," Jeremiah said firmly. "She's my wife, in every way that matters." Ezra studied him carefully. "You really love this girl? More than my own life?" The older man nodded slowly. "Then we'd better make sure she stays safe. I'll ride over tomorrow with my boys. We'll be ready for these varmints." When Jeremiah returned home, he found Malin waiting on the porch, her face tight with worry. "Men come?" she asked. "Not yet, but they will." He pulled her into his arms, breathing in the sweet scent of jasmine that always seemed to cling to her hair. "Malin, I want you to know whatever happens, these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life." She pulled back to look at him, her dark eyes fierce with determination. "No talk like that. We fight together, we win together. We lived together long time." That night, they made love with desperate passion, as if they could hold back the dawn through sheer force of will. Malin traced the scars on Jeremiah's chest from years of hard living, while he marveled at the smooth silk of her skin. Spoke their love in whispers and touches, in the universal language that needed no translation, as the first light of dawn crept through their window. Jeremiah held Mahlon close and made a silent vow. Whatever evil was riding toward his ranch, it would not take her from him. He had found something rarer than gold in this unexpected woman, and he would die before he let anyone steal it away. "Promise me something," Mahlon whispered against his chest. "Anything. If something happened to me, you find good woman. Have family. Be happy. Nothing's going to happen to you," Jeremiah said fiercely. "And even if it did, there could never be another woman for me. You're it, Mahlon. You're my beginning. And my end." She lifted her head to look at him, tears sparkling on her lashes like diamonds. "Then we make sure there is no end. We fight like tigers." Outside, a hawk cried in the distance, and Jeremiah wondered if it was an omen. By nightfall, they would know if their love was strong enough to survive the storm that was coming. They came at dusk, when the light was tricky and shadows provided cover. Jeremiah had been expecting them, but the sight of 8 armed men riding hard toward his ranch still made his blood run cold. He whistled sharply, the signal he'd arranged with Ezra, then grabbed Mahlon's hand. "Remember what we practiced," he said, pressing his spare pistol into her hands. "Stay low, stay behind cover, and don't hesitate to shoot if you have to." Mahlon nodded, her face pale but determined. Together, she whispered, and kissed him hard before they separated to their positions. The riders didn't bother with stealth once they reached the yard. Their leader, a thin man with a cruel mouth and expensive clothes, dismounted with theatrical flair. Jeremiah Flint. He called out in a voice thick with a Brooklyn accent. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Nobody here belongs to anybody," Jeremiah called back from behind an overturned water trough. "Except maybe you belonging in hell?" The man laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Clever. I'm Vincent Malone, and that Chinese girl you're harboring represents a significant investment. She was purchased fair and square to work off a debt. You've been interfering with legitimate business." "Slavery isn't legitimate, no matter how you dress it up," Jeremiah retorted. "Slavery." Malone's voice turned mocking. "This is simply indentured servitude. Perfectly legal." The girl signed a contract. A contract she couldn't read in a language she didn't understand. "Not my problem. Now, you can hand her over peacefully, or we can take her by force. Your choice." Jeremiah's answer came in the form of a rifle shot that knocked the hat clean. Off Malone's head, the man dove for cover, shouting orders to his men. And suddenly, the ranch yard exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as Malone's men spread out, using his buildings for cover. But they had underestimated their opposition. Ezra and his 3 sons had positioned themselves strategically around the property, and their crossfire quickly turned the attackers' advantage into a death trap. Mahlon proved to be as fierce as she was accurate. From her position behind the woodpile, she picked off 2 men who tried to flank Jeremiah's position. Her small size allowed her to move quickly between cover points, appearing where the attackers least expected her. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When the smoke began to clear, 5 of Malone's men lay, dead or wounded, in the dirt. The survivors, including Malone himself, had their hands raised in surrender. "It's over," Ezra called out, emerging from behind the barn with his rifle trained on the remaining attackers. "Drop your weapons." But Malone wasn't finished. As Jeremiah stepped out from cover, the criminal lunged for a fallen gun, rolling and coming up with the weapon aimed directly at Mahlon. "She comes with me, or she dies right here." Malone snarled, blood streaming from a graze on his cheek. "Your choice, rancher." Time slowed to a crawl. Jeremiah saw the finger tightening on the trigger, saw Malone's eyes widen with terror. saw his whole world about to be destroyed by a madman's greed. Without conscious thought, he threw himself forward, tackling Malone just as the gun discharged. The two men hit the ground hard, wrestling for control of the weapon. Malone was smaller but desperate, fueled by the knowledge that capture meant prison or worse. They rolled through the dirt, each trying to gain advantage. The gun caught between them, another shot rang out, and both men went still. Jeremiah felt a burning sensation in his side, but pushed through the pain to wrench the gun away from his opponent. Malone's eyes had gone glassy, a spreading stain on his expensive shirt marking where the bullet had found its mark. "Jeremiah!" Malin's voice seemed to come from very far away. He looked up to see her running toward him, her face streaked with tears and gunpowder. Then the world tilted sideways and darkness claimed him. Jeremiah woke 3 days later to find Malin sleeping in a chair beside his bed, her hand clutched in his. The bullet had passed through his side, missing vital organs but leaving him weak from blood loss. Doc Harrison from the nearby town of Cedar Falls had ridden out to tend the wounded, and his professional opinion was that Jeremiah would make a full recovery. Stubborn as a mule, the elderly doctor had pronounced, "Takes more than one bullet to put down a man like this." The aftermath of the battle had been swift and decisive. The surviving members of Malone's gang had been arrested by the territorial marshal, who had arrived 2 days after the shooting. Vincent Malone himself had died from his wound, taking his secrets about the human trafficking operation with him. To the grave, good riddance, Marshal Thompson had declared. "We've been tracking that bunch for 2 years. You folks did the territory a service." But the victory felt hollow to Jeremiah as he struggled with the implications of what had happened. Malin was free, now truly free, but that also meant she was free to leave if she chose. The thought terrified him more than facing down 8 armed men. "You awake now, for good?" Malin asked, stirring as she felt him squeeze her hand. Her English had improved dramatically over the past month, though she still struggled with complex grammar. "I think so," Jeremiah replied, his voice hoarse. "How long was I out?" 3 days. You've lost much blood." She touched his forehead, checking for fever. "I was so scared. When you fell down, I thought." Her voice broke, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Hey," Jeremiah said softly, reaching up to wipe away her tears. "I'm all right. We're both all right. It's over." Malin nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "Jeremiah, I need tell you something. Before men came, I received letter to Chinese merchant. He bring it from San Francisco." She produced a worn envelope from her dress pocket. "My cousin Li Wei, she write to me. She'll say there is way for me to go back to China. Good family in San Francisco. They help Chinese women who want to return home. They pay for passage, help with papers." Jeremiah felt his heart sink into his boots. This was it. Then Malin was going to leave him. He had always known it was a possibility, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like another bullet to the chest. Do you want to go back?" he asked, proud that his voice remained steady. Malin was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. "For a long time, I dream only of home, of China, of family I never see again. But then I think, what is home? Is place where you're born? Or is place where your heart lives?" She leaned forward, taking both of his hands in hers. "My heart lives here, with you. You saved my life, not just from bad men, but from loneliness, from thinking I am nothing. You make me feel like I am worth something. You're worth everything." Jeremiah said fiercely, "You're worth more than this whole ranch, more than anything I could ever give you." "Then I stay," Malin said simply. "I choose this life. I choose you. But ... She hesitated, biting her lip nervously. "But what?" "I want to be your real wife, not just woman who lives in your house. I want ceremony, papers, everything proper. I want world to know that Malin Joe belongs to Jeremiah Flint, and Jeremiah Flint belongs to Malin Joe. Jeremiah struggled to sit up, ignoring the pain in his side. Are you proposing to me, woman? Malin's face broke into the brilliant smile that never failed to stop his heart. Yes, I think I am. Well, in that case, Jeremiah said, pulling her down for a kiss that tasted of tears and joy and infinite possibility. I accept. The wedding took place on the first warm day of spring, 6 months after the battle that had secured their freedom. Word had spread throughout the territory about the Chinese woman who had helped fight off Vincent Malone's gang. And Malin had become something of a local legend. The ceremony itself was a blend of cultures that perfectly represented their unique love story. Pastor Williams from Cedar Falls performed the Christian service, while Mr. Chen, the traveling merchant who had become their friend and unofficial translator, incorporated traditional Chinese elements that honored Malin's heritage. Malin wore a dress she had sewn herself from silk fabric Chen had brought from San Francisco, the deep red color symbolizing good fortune in her culture. Jeremiah had managed to find a proper suit from the general store, though he felt awkward and overdressed compared to his usual work clothes. Ezra Cromwell served as best man, his sons acting as groomsmen alongside several neighbors who had hidden their own wives during the gunfight. Doc Harrison gave Malin away, having become a surrogate father figure during Jeremiah's recovery. Do you, Jeremiah Flint, take Malin Joe to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? Pastor Williams intoned. I do, Jeremiah said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd with absolute certainty. And do you, Malin Joe, take Jeremiah Flint to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live? I do, Malin replied in clear English, then added something in Chinese that made Mr. Chen smile broadly. She says her heart and his heart are now one heart. Chen translated for the crowd. Very beautiful sentiment. When Pastor Williams pronounced them man and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Jeremiah kissed his bride with enthusiasm that made several of the ladies fan themselves vigorously. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the territory had ever seen. Malin had spent weeks preparing a feast that combined American favorites with Chinese delicacies, teaching the local women recipes that would be passed down for generations. Ezra had contributed several bottles of whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion, declaring that this qualified more than most. As the sun set and the dancing began, Jeremiah found himself watching his wife, as she laughed with the other women, teaching them a traditional Chinese dance. She had blossomed over the past months, gaining confidence and finding her place in their small community. You did good, son, Doc Harrison said, appearing at Jeremiah's elbow with 2 glasses of whiskey. That's a special woman you married. Don't I know it? Jeremiah replied, accepting the drink gratefully. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the right woman had shown up that day instead. Doc chuckled. Son, the right woman did show up. Just wasn't the one you expected. Later that night, as the guests finally departed and the ranch grew quiet, Jeremiah and Malin sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the clear Wyoming sky. She had changed into a simple cotton dress and let her hair down from its elaborate wedding style, looking more beautiful than ever in the moonlight. Happy? Jeremiah asked, pulling her closer against his side. Very happy, Malin replied, then switched to Chinese for a moment before translating. I told the stars that my wandering days are over. This is where I belong. A year later, their first child was born, a daughter with Jeremiah's green eyes and Malin's delicate features. They named her Hope, both for the bright future she represented and for the hope that had sustained them through their darkest hours. As Jeremiah rocked his daughter to sleep, while Malin prepared their evening meal, he reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. He had ordered a mail-order bride, expecting a simple transaction companionship in exchange for security. Instead, he had received the greatest gift of his life, a love story that would be told and retold throughout the territory for generations to come. The loner rancher had indeed been waiting for his mail-order bride. He just hadn't known that the woman of his dreams would arrive speaking a different language, from a different world, carrying nothing but courage and a heart large enough to transform them both, and in the end, that had made all the difference.